Everything is under control, Evergrande said, at the edge of the cliff, building hundreds of residential buildings without any demand for them. After all, what could go wrong? This is Libertarian View, your source of decentralized and distributed information. You have certainly already heard about the famous Chinese ghost towns. In 2009, the first reports about the so-called Chinese economic miracle hit the Western nations. The country was building new cities at an amazing rate, except that, apparently, nobody wanted to live in them. The pictures of the ghost towns were a clear indication of a housing bubble. The original idea was to reduce population density within great urban centers. All the wonders of central planning. As if building a bunch of houses would be enough for people to just decide to move to them. That is not how economy works. If people are willing to cluster in great urban centers, it is only because of the incentives they can find there, which somehow pays back. Whether it is because of better work opportunities or because of more amenities due to a greater supply of services. The fact is that apartments and commercial spaces were built virtually overnight around urban poles. In other words, in the outskirts of big cities. Just to give you an idea, China used the same amount of concrete in 3 years that the USA had used throughout the whole 20th century. What has been happening in China over the last years is a real Keynesian economic aberration. It is certainly without precedence in history. And of course, the consequences thereof are expected to be catastrophic not only for China, but for the whole world. But first, what is Evergrande anyway? The China Evergrande Group is a real estate developer hosted in the Guangdong province, which sells middle and high-class apartments. It is the second largest company in the sector in China, and in 2018, it was considered the highest market value developer in the world. The company has already delivered over 1,300 projects in over 280 cities through Chinese territory. Nevertheless, with all its productivity, or rather to make such growth even possible, Evergrande has amassed a gigantic debt, around $300 billion. To put it in perspective, such amount is higher than the national debt of some countries like New Zealand. It comes as no surprise that Evergrande is one of the most indebted companies worldwide. This year, however, things have gotten much worse for the organization, since the overall debt by December last year was just $125 billion. As it turns out, about 50% of that debt had to be paid off during this year of 2021. Since the beginning of the year, the company has been stalling the debt, which has grown much greater over time. The issue that stands is that the more information about the company's lack of money to honor its debts is spread, the less clients it is able to attract. The real estate market in China typically requires upfront payment, and you would not pay upfront for an apartment that you were not certain you would receive because the company could go bankrupt before delivering it. The stocks for Evergrande dropped more than 80% just from February to September this year. Shares that once figured around $32 through the historical high in 2018 are now, as I write this article, worth a little over $2 and going down. The first red flag for the global market came in August 31st. The company, in its first semester results report, disclosed the risk of default on their loans, and 2 weeks ago the big Chinese banks were notified by the Chinese Housing Authority that the group would not be able to make the payments for the loans due by September 20th. It has been estimated that if the company bankrupts, around 1.5 million customers will lose deposits paid for properties that have not even started being built. A video that shows several Chinese buildings being demolished went viral on social networks. These buildings were unfinished for years and were abandoned because the building costs became higher than the possible revenue they would bring. That makes truly clear that this enormous bubble has already broken out. This does not affect only Evergrande. With its impending collapse, several other corporations are now being seen with distrust, overall halting the whole real estate market in China. There are signs that the company has been asking for government's help to pay their debts since last year. Although the government has tried to mediate negotiations between Evergrande and the banks, experts claim that the Chinese government would not pay for a ransom of the company like the US government did in 2008. However, it looks like they're wrong. On September 17th, the Popular Bank of China added a net value sum of 90 billion yuan, around $14 billion, to the market, the biggest since February, through a reverse buyback deal of 7 to 14 days. This points out that the government is concerned with the consequences for the credit and real estate market, which weigh heavily in the country's economy, and has already started the printers. Are we looking at a similar scenario to the USA in 2008, but this time in China? Only time will tell. Some economists consider Evergrande's bankruptcy might have a global impact even greater than the breakout of Lehman Brothers. If you don't remember, the American bank Lehman Brothers went bankrupt in 2008, starting the burst of the American real estate bubble. This event has recently completed 13 years on September 15th, but its collateral damages are felt on the global economy to this date. As it turns out, the meltdown of a bank tends to hit harder than that of a corporation because, after all, banks end up involved in a complex network of loans and crossing investments. The problem with Evergrande is that it also offers investment services. As many properties in China are bought for investment purposes, the company offers the service of investing in construction process with interest if you don't have enough money to buy a whole apartment or house. The hundreds of people that can be seen rallying in front of Evergrande's buildings are many of the small investors that are now unable to withdraw their money. Besides, Evergrande also took huge loans abroad. Everything points out to a similar scenario with the imminent breaking of the company. The impact can already be felt. The market is in distress with the possibility of a sky-high default. On September 20th, the company stocks dropped about 10%, and that crash was felt in other countries' stock markets. Furthermore, the commodities market seems to be the most frightened with Evergrande's bankruptcy. The iron ore price, for instance, dropped almost 9% at Qingdao's port in China, checking below $100 per ton for the first time since May 2018. But how has it all come to this point? It appears to be another failure of big bad capitalism, right? Well, no. It is the classic case of every government-fed real estate bubble. Artificially low interest rates, which prompted people to get in debt to purchase housing, and, as we have said before, the relentless construction of buildings with no real market demand. The prohibition of other types of investment by the government has also artificially promoted this market. The government tried to create a demand that never existed by forcing the real estate market to develop intensely overnight. Although it may be too soon to confirm what is to come, it all points out to turbulent days. However, nobody doubts that this is another plain example of the catastrophic central planning. Fiction of the Chinese economic miracle comes with an expiration date, and when it expires, it brings a series of disorders. There is no wealth production by destroying capital, and that is what central planning always does. There is simply no way for a central entity to be able to guide all the tendencies in the market. China's economic growth makes it clear. While the free market grows by solving problems and improving people's lives, central planning aims at an assumed GDP growth and ends up complicating people's lives. This happened in the Soviet Union, and it will not be different in China. It is impossible to measure the scale of this impact to the Chinese and global economy, but it is possible to have an idea. And remember, the fall of the Soviet Union started after a catastrophic event, the accident at Chernobyl's power plant, which rocked the whole world, followed by Soviet Union economic collapse. The question that remains is, will the big event of 2020 mark the beginning of the failure for the Chinese communist regime? Let us wait for the unfolding of these events. But one thing I can say for sure, the whole world will suffer the consequences for this crisis. And it might be worse this time. With all the money printing we have seen since the beginning of 2020, This new event might prompt world governments to double their bets. At least now, the ordinary people have a way to evade this state's madness, thanks to Bitcoin. Thank you for your audience. This article was originally written by J.J. Lieber, translated and narrated by Arthur Silvani. If you like this video, please hit the thumbs up icon below and share the video in your social network. If you want to be notified of other videos, hit the subscribe and then the bell icon. See you soon.